record on my computer and we'll get started. So
Okay.
thanks for joining us. And this is our first of a series we're going to try to do. And Chad and I were talking about this. How can we best get the word out to our clients? Because we're having these conversations over and over again. And we just wanted to try to get as many people as possible together, record this, give you the opportunity to share it. And it's obvious that it's all around working from home, at least for starters.
It's
I think,
tricky at first.
yeah, it's very tricky. I have an office next to my home, so I'm continuing to go into the office because it's connected. And so this is really no different for me. Like this is how I always work, and this is how Forget Computers has always worked. We have a lot of work from home days, and we have a very distributed team in the far suburbs and other cities. But a lot of our clients, even if they dabbled in working from home now and then, they haven't done it at this scale. And they haven't, a lot of us were not prepared to just overnight make this change. So I wanted to talk through with everyone and get some questions. Everyone's muted right now. So if you want to participate, send us a message through chat. I've got my chat window open.
Or just unmute and tell us. We'll be happy to answer.
Yeah, we might do that as well. If you can't unmute, ping me and I'll unmute you. And we can. So I want this to be interactive as much as possible. Otherwise, Chad and I are just going to drone on and on. But we do have some things that we've seen and that we want to share around working from home. So for starters, and Chad, sorry to interrupt you there.
No, not at all. I just said, yeah, there's so many things to think about that are different working from home than working in an office where things may be more or less predictable. I had a blip right before we jumped on. So it requires a little more patience at first. And we thought it would be worthwhile to talk about some things that have worked well for us because we've both worked remotely for many years, and there's some things that work really well and some things that maybe don't work quite as well.
Right.
So grateful.
And we talked about this. Yeah, we talked about this earlier in our podcast. How if we all had to do this even a few years ago, the challenges would have been much greater because the technology and the infrastructure really wasn't there, and it is there today. But the challenges remain that change is our biggest enemy. Meaning, if you get something to work in a perfect world, you don't change it. It's working. Do not make any changes unless you have to. Sometimes there are security patches or updates that have to take place. But the problem with that advice is we may be able to control things internally for our own team, but as soon as we start getting clients and partners involved, they have different systems than we do. So we use Ring Central. Ring Central is Zoom. We're on Zoom. Someone else might use Teams. Someone else might use WebEx. There are there are lots of solutions out there, and even within our own environment, I have to make changes. Like I'm using my Apple AirPods, and they work great. But if I forget to recharge them, then a long meeting or series of meetings, they could start alerting me that they're running low on battery power, and they could go dead. So
that's a good point. I do the same thing. I actually have two pairs of headphones that I cycle, and I make sure one is always charged because sometimes they're not around, and it's really an easy thing to overlook. If you use wireless headphones, if you just plug something in, sometimes that's easier, but everyone has to kind of find what works best for them.
Right. And not everyone can have dual redundant headphones. I understand that.
No.
So I also have a pair of these that I had before I got my AirPods, and I love the AirPods. I did some audio testing. The AirPods, it's really a matter of choice. They work just as well, if not maybe better than these. And then I know if you don't have anything, you can certainly use your laptop audio, or my laptop's connected to a display and I could use my display audio. That doesn't work for me because I'm in a room with other people. It was my coworkers, now it's my family going in and out. You might have just seen one of them there. So the background noise doesn't work for me, I need these noise canceling headsets, and these as well. And then these could go Bluetooth, and I could rely on that. But if I'm serious about a meeting and I don't want Bluetooth to get in the way, then I'll plug them in, and that's why these are plugged in. So on a larger scale, if you can plug in, I would recommend doing that, at least for starters, especially if you're having problems, right, Chad? And that goes not just for headphones, but that goes for your internet connection.
Yeah, in fact, I presented at a virtual conference on Friday that was, initially planned to be in person, of course, but they shifted things around because of the recent events. And so I did some tests beforehand just to see, and Wi-Fi works pretty good sometimes, but sometimes there's blips, and it's really hard when you have participants that are making time and attention, and it's frustrating. And so I've found much more, like I'm plugged in right now, it works a lot better, and we're happy to give you some guidance on that if that's something that you've had issues with. That's a good
and I'm also plugged in right now. What a lot of people maybe don't realize is office networks are optimized for a lot of this type of traffic and a lot of people. And the Wi-Fi that we use in the office typically is more expensive and more robust than what we have at home. So even though what we have at home works great for Netflix and gaming or whatever else we're doing, maybe the occasional chat or video, it can be problematic, especially when you start throwing a lot of people into a meeting. So if you can plug in. A lot of people don't know that they have that option because their router or modem maybe is hidden in a closet, in a basement, behind the TV, or traditionally wherever their phone used to be when we all had landline phones. But if you find your modem, there's a good chance in the back that you can plug in with an Ethernet cable, just like you can at work. Most of them, you just plug it in to the available port and you plug into your computer, and you'll notice that you get an Ethernet connection. I actually, maybe I should show that on my screen right now. I will caution, if you're going to do that, be very careful, because if you do something and it doesn't work and you need to put it back, that's where people get into trouble. Once again, talking about change, don't change something unless you know how to put it back, because if
it's working, if it's working, you just enjoy that it's working.
Yeah, because
stuff is decent. Yeah,
if you get in a situation where you don't know how to put something back, it could be challenging for us to even help you put that back without some eyes, which with FaceTime, we could do. But I'm going to share my desktop here for just a minute. And just to show you what I'm talking about, if I go into system preferences and I go into network, I am connected through Wi-Fi, but my primary connection is display Ethernet, because I'm connected through Ethernet. So certainly if you can plug in, do so. That will eliminate a lot of issues. Because what we're seeing are people having issues, and it's really hard to determine, is it a cloud issue? A lot of cloud providers have struggled with the influx of thousands of people coming on board very quickly. And in fact, I just checked one of the cloud providers, and I think this is the first day in maybe 2 weeks I've not seen red or yellow on the status screen. So it could be a cloud provider, could be your internet provider. We've had and seen some internet issues with Comcast here in Chicago, and I'm sure around the country. It could be your router needs to be restarted. It could be your wireless, and that's why just eliminating any of those variables like the wireless can really help. Okay, let's see. Chad, is there anything you wanted to mention before we move on?
No, that's an important one, and that's a request that seems like I've been asked a lot in the last couple of weeks. Is there any solution? The meeting video is skippy or the audio is skippy, and it's safe to presume that we're all using Wi-Fi, especially when those things happen. And a lot of my pals who I thought, when I said, "Oh, just plug in," they didn't know what I was talking about, and it required a lot more explanation. And so if that's something that would be helpful to some of you, I mean, another solution,
Well, it's been a
that's a
while
little,
since we plugged in, right?
it has
We've
been so
got
long, right? There hasn't really been a need. So it's kind of funny. Was there anything else you wanted to show us with your screen?
I was going to show some more things with the screen, but before I do that, I thought we would talk just briefly about the need for um, cyber awareness or security awareness,
Sure.
the need to remind your team that people are preying on this situation to take
Yeah.
advantage. And
Unfortunately.
yeah, and it's because anytime they can take advantage of people, they will. And now is a perfect time when people are isolated at home and and stressed out and confused. You know, I've seen I got text messages to my phone the other day for two account. Well, I think one was supposedly tax related, and one was something to do with an account I have. Where is it? Anyway, it was a scam, right? They were trying to get me to click on something and download something. And so you've got to remind your staff to be ultra aware, right? Right, Chad?
It's important because it's the sense of urgency that these kinds of events, like a pandemic, I can't think of something that's more urgent, um, is very useful to criminals because they can get us to take action very quickly. And lots of people fall for stuff that we wouldn't think, but it's very human. It's not something that we want to hide. And, you know, if something happens and we click on something and we do something that's errant, it's important to share that very quickly. If you think that, you know, something out of the ordinary has happened, or we clicked on something that maybe we shouldn't have, because waiting leads to some things that are just nasty and in most cases avoidable.
Yeah. So I want to remind people, you know, I'm being inundated like a lot of you are with COVID-19 information. Um, and I don't want to add to that by just dumping a bunch of information on you, but I do want to show you just a few resources. And our resource that we've always added to and continue to build out is support.forgetcomputers.com. And this is where some of you might go to view ticket requests. At least all of you could, if you're a client of ours, sign in here and submit a request or view your ticket history. But we also have some great articles, and we continue to add to those, if not every month, um, or if not every day, sometimes weekly and definitely monthly. So use the search feature, browse around. Some of the things we did recently is we added a Ring Central area because we were getting a lot of questions about Ring Central. And just to remind everyone again, Ring Central uses Zoom for video conferencing. That's what we're on right here. So we've had for a while tips for better Ring Central meetings. I definitely recommend resharing that with your team. And if something is outdated or doesn't make sense, let us know so we can update that. I want to also mention this is a view of the Ring Central backend, which is similar to the Zoom backend, meaning if you see a feature in a meeting, maybe that someone else is hosting that you don't have, we've had a few requests like this. We've had requests for polling. That's something that's relatively new, and breakout rooms. And those are two advanced features that have to be turned on, have to be enabled. So your account may not have them enabled, but they can be enabled. So if you need something, reach out to us and we can verify whether you have that capability or not, or whether it needs to be turned on. So there's a ton of options here. And some of these are a good idea. Some of these are new. Some of these you might not want to turn on for one reason or another, but reach out to us if you have questions about that. I wanted to also share, and I'll post this into our, we have a work from home document that we included as a signature in all of our recent tickets. And that is, where is that? That's under announcements. Here, tips for working from home. We've been adding to this as we find issues, including, you know, how to check your network to see if it's a network issue versus a cloud issue. Check on the status. You know, here's Ring Central, and everything's looking good today, but they could have issues, and they definitely have had issues over the past week. And we'll keep adding things here. One of the things I'm going to add is this resource our partners Intiva put together. We work with Intiva on some networking and Windows projects, and they're a much larger organization than we are, so they have the resources to dedicate to some of this stuff. And they have some great articles here related to everything that's going on. And then I just want to remind people about Apple. Apple also has a website that they worked on with the CDC and apparently the White House is what it says here. So that was news to me. But it's a nice site. And when we talk about security, if you're not already using a password manager, I would definitely encourage your team to start. And I'm sorry, should have put my phone on Do Not Disturb because I'm getting a call that I just canceled. If your team isn't already using a password manager, I strongly recommend 1Password. That's what we use. And they now have basically, the trial that they've always provided, I think it was a 14, maybe a 30-day trial, is now unlimited, at least until this stuff blows over. So they've removed trial limits. So if you don't already have a 1Password account, either for your personal use or certainly for your business use, I would consider looking into that. One of the things that I will share when we're done here, and I'll send out through an email to all of our primary contacts, is this remote working checklist. And this is something Chad and I came across in our research from the Cyber Management Alliance. And I love checklists, and we use checklist here. And this is by no means comprehensive, and in some cases it may not apply to your organization, but it's something that would be good for you to look through and compare against what you're doing, and certainly reach out to Chad or I or our team if you have any questions. I want to remind people this particular message, this particular meeting is really focused on our primary contacts at each organization. We did not invite all of our clients or all of our the end users sitting at the desk, all of your employees. So we're trying to, once again, rather than inundate you with information, we want to be selective about this. So I thought we would go through some of these checklist items really quickly together, Chad.
Sure.
And actually, as I say that, I think I shared the checklist and you cannot see it, so I need to share. And speaking of sharing, one of the things I wanted to touch on when we talk about having a meeting is, in my experience, the Mac OS apps, whether we're talking about Zoom, Ring Central Meetings, Teams, sometimes those apps don't always function as well as the iOS apps. The iOS apps are available on iPad and iPhone, and I'm sure they have them for Android as well. And I don't know for sure, but I have some theories on why that is. And I think part of it is the market for iOS is just so much larger that a lot of companies, first and foremost, will build an app for the iOS. And then if the resources are there and the usage is there, they'll build it for the Mac OS. And do you have anything else to add to that, Chad?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I think globally, most work cultures, and we talked about this a little bit with a few people last week, that said, how are some people really good at this already? Right? I heard that a handful of times last week, and a lot of people, and I talked to during the day, doing resilience, analysis and things like that. One of the questions I like to ask is what their primary device is. And the answers are across the board, but I would say more than half of the people I talk to say that they do most of their communication on their mobile device. Mm-hmm. So that meaning their phone, right? So they're answering emails, and when they have to do something long form, they have to write longer emails, for example, or reports or things that are more lengthy, then they tend to shift to, a desktop or a laptop. But by far, the majority of people are doing a lot of their day-to-day stuff on a
Hmm.
mobile device, on a phone or an iPad, and that's probably going to continue to grow. And so that it makes sense if we were a company that were trying to build tools and things for our audience. When most of our audience is going to be on a mobile, especially some of the younger kids. I mean, they tend to be even more snickety. They're not. They think like lugging a laptop around now is hard work. They don't know what it
Yeah.
was like, 20 years ago when these things weighed, half a ton. But the point is that it's to each their own. And I agree. I think there's a lot of desktop apps that have kind of gotten the short end of the stick.
Yeah. So in my experience, even though I live for the most part on Mac OS, sometimes and often I will use the iOS app for phone calls, for meetings, for texting or messaging. And Ring Central and Zoom also have the ability to share your iOS. So right now, I'm going to share. Let's see. Oh, I need to disconnect. I've got too many devices here. Okay, I'm going to share my iPhone. So here, can you see my iPhone screen, Chad?
Yeah, I can see
Yeah.
the bark, the tree. It's nice.
Yep. Yep. And here's my Ring Central app. And here are my contacts. And yeah, so this is a great way to remind people that if they're having problems with Mac OS, the app, or sometimes they're working in a browser, so you may need to use a different browser, you may need to try the app, or you may need to switch to one of these devices. And I also, if you need to share something from your phone, it's a great way during meetings to do so. So I'm going to stop this.
It's another. It might be worth mentioning too that in lieu of plugging in a laptop to a modem or something that can be a lot of complexity for some of us.
Mhm.
Sometimes just getting on our phone and turning off Wi-Fi and using the cellular network. That's another
Yeah.
alternative. If we're just, listening in on a call, another thing we can do is we can turn off our video. That can
Yeah.
sometimes improve the performance of the audio, so we can at least hear and follow along and contribute. It really depends. A lot of different. We have a client, for example, that I worked with yesterday, who's in a remote, in Wales, in rural Wales, like
Mhm.
United Kingdom, and their internet there isn't. Not only are we sending it across the pond, but they also just have very basic residential internet service
Mhm.
there. And so sometimes there's not a lot of options. And, in those cases, sometimes using our phones, cellular connection is a good choice.
Right. Yeah. As much as want to see other people's faces, especially as we're all quarantined here, sometimes for technology's sake, we just need to turn that off and just do audio. So let's see. So here's the checklist I was referring to earlier, but wasn't actually sharing properly. And before we go any further, does anyone have any questions or challenges? And Michelle from our team, I know you've been working at home recently, if you want to chime in, that you've run into that you want us to address. I know from my own experience of helping my family, the biggest challenge seems to always be audio, getting connected to the right channel through audio. And actually, I'm going to go back and share my entire screen again, because I just want to remind everybody that under system preferences, sound, there's this checkbox, show volume in menu bar. And oftentimes I'll recommend turning that on. I've been turning that on for a lot of people who are asking for help. Because once that's on, you can then go up to your audio and you can see what you're using for audio, and then you can switch between audio. And sometimes what happens is when you quit an app or restart an app or start a new meeting or switch from Ring Central to WebEx or vice versa, the audio doesn't always carry through and you have to reconnect. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges um, that people are running into, is just not understanding how their audio is connected. Okay, so I'm going to focus again on the checklist.
I think one of the most important things, and this is different for everyone, but
Mm-hmm.
and I tell myself this all the time, and I tell my kids this all the time. Certainly we're homeschooling now, is to create a workspace. I mean, it really is such a simple and simplistic sort of thing. But if we don't have a dedicated space that we can return to every day, it's a struggle. It's really hard to work that way. And Ben, you're in good shape because you've got this kind of separation between your house and your work, and that's very wise. I think that it's when I first started working remotely with teams all over the place, years ago in Southeast Alaska, it was probably my single biggest win after the first year or so was, I would just go down to the coffee shop, or I would go to these different places. And I just kept feeling like, a kind of a sense of frustration in the back of my mind, that I failed a lot at solving that. Like, oh, why is this so frustrating? Why is this so hard? Until I just created a space for myself that I could count on every day to go and set up my stuff and have power and pencils and like anything that I might need, snacks and the whole thing, and just dedicate a space to working that way. It's really, really important.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Chad. And what I thought we'd do now is just quickly run through the remote working checklist, which I have up on the screen here. And I don't want to go into all the details of the checklist because we'll just bore everyone here. But I think I want to touch on a few items that are important to the majority of our clients. So let's just run through this. Cybersecurity, we've already kind of touched on that. I cannot stress this enough. For those of you who have PII Protect, the online videos, you can, if you're managing that or you need to manage that, let us know, because there's a way that you can see and track the engagement of your team and remind them that resource is there. And I know PII Protect has recently been putting out COVID specific videos to remind people of the danger out there. So certainly don't let up on cybersecurity. You need it more than ever now.
And a lot of clients are going to be, I mean, the nice thing about PII Protect and the reason we think it's important is because it's a very easy piece to demonstrate to your own clients who are going to be coming to you and asking to demonstrate this commitment and these kinds of activities. And it's something that's really can be done very quickly and demonstrate some competency and some supporting some of these good practices. And clients love it. I mean, in terms of their audits, when they ask and they want, sometimes the level of scrutiny isn't very high, but sometimes it is, and they want more proof. And these are things that we can generate very quickly, and it shows that you're actually trying, and that's really the goal.
Yeah, and I learned something from those videos as well. As much as I feel I know about security, I watch those videos, and there's always something in there that I was not aware of.
And they're short and relatively painless.
Yeah. It's not Twin Peaks, which
no,
I've been watching.
It's not. That's great. What episode are you on now?
We just started season 2.
Oh, right on. Awesome. That's fun.
Season opener. Yeah.
Cool.
They definitely ramped up the weirdness in season 2 already.
Oh yeah. Oh so, man.
Okay. So let's do passwords. Yeah. Sorry. We'll keep it on track here. Password. We talked about 1Password, how there's a free trial for that, or extended trial for that. I would take advantage of. 2-factor authentication. Once again, Chad and I have been talking about this over and over, and we're tired of hearing ourselves say it. But if you can turn on 2-factor authentication, do it.
Oh, it'll save you from 99% of the kinds of things that we see that are unfortunate and in most cases preventable. And let's talk about 1Password a little bit before we move on. The greatest value, and my wife just went through this not too long before all of these things happened in the world. But I think it took her a weekend. I think she spent pretty much a solid weekend going through and entering all of her accounts into a password manager. And at the end of it, we celebrated. To be honest, I mean, it was a lot of work, and it's tedious. It's not really hard. She didn't describe it that way. I said, "What was that like?" And she said, "I wouldn't describe it as hard. I would describe it as just tedious." But a week later, it's amazing how much time it saves, and it's, I guess, the best part of the most selfish value for each of us is it builds an inventory, of all these, even using a 1Password, or any password manager during times like this, this pandemic. I'm getting emails from accounts that, like, people that have my email address that I had no idea. It's like, really? Like, how did this, like, really obscure fabricator get my, they must have bought it from somebody or whatever. But it's a way to keep an inventory using a password manager. I keep an inventory of all our online accounts because, oh man, when something happens and we don't have that inventory and our identity is being used in ways that are out of our control, it's a very frightening experience. And I can't tell you what peace of mind it's worth when it's done. I mean, you probably have similar stories, Ben.
Yeah, I mean, it is it's kind of like organizing anything. It can be overwhelming a bit when you first get into it, but it's really satisfying to have that in some place that you can then improve. So it's a great place to organize. It's a virtual wallet for me. I have credit cards, passport information, I have a lot of things in there, and I also work very hard to protect it. I have multiple layers of security, not just password, but I have two-factor on my 1Password. So I have a master password, I have two-factor authentication, and then with our teams, we even have an additional layer of duo authentication. So our team, which uses 1Password team, has to go through a duo two-factor, not just their own, but a company two-factor. So it's very tight, and that's maybe beyond the scope of what we can talk about here. But the point is, you got to protect that stuff, right?
I have another thing that's worth mentioning here. I would say more than any other question that I get about password managers is concern around, the password management company being compromised. And this happened, recently in the past couple of years. 1Password had an issue, and LastPass, I think before that, the year before that, that does happen sometimes. But the added value of using a password manager is they have a password generator built into them. And honestly, I don't know any of my passwords. I really don't. They're long and they're convoluted. And when they go into that system, when they're in that kind of storage unit, if you will, at 1Password's offices or whoever's password manager you prefer, even, iCloud or Firefox, like browser ones, right? They're stored in a way that's really mixed up and encrypted. So it's really hard. It takes a long time to decrypt those passwords. And in some cases, months or years of a computer working on that. And so it's still the very best that we can do to protect ourselves to use these services, because, if we're using and reuse, password reuse, my team is probably sick of hearing me talk about password reuse, but it's the worst. It's really puts us at a lot of risk when we do that. I mean, it's easy because we're not using a password manager, something that can, add, complex passwords for us. So they have to be memorable. So in order to make them memorable, they have to be pretty easy. And so that's a dilemma, because when we reuse a password, criminals know that. And so when they get a hold of one login and password through, tricking us into doing something, then they take that password and they try it against Chase.com and WellsFargo.com and Yahoo.com and, Amazon.com and on down the list. And it's not really super spy stuff that hackers are doing very much, or criminals are doing very much. They're really just following patterns, and most of it's behavior, when we don't have good habits. So a password manager is really important to helping us all have much better habits that protect ourselves and our families and everybody else. Right, Ben?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't know any of my passwords, and if I did lose access to 1Password, 1Password's not going to be able to help me due to their own security. So I would just have to start over, and that's certainly doable. It would not be fun, but it would be possible, right?
Yeah.
I would feel much safer starting over than having the risk of an easy to remember password out there. So, okay, mobile equipment. Mobile equipment, I need to remind everyone, it's not just your phone, not just your iPad, it's your computer in most cases, unless you have a desktop. And in some cases, we recommended people just take their desktop home. It was like, we're all here for another month now working from home. So if you haven't already taken your desktop home, just do that. Probably easier than getting a new machine. So mobile devices are almost everything we're using these days in many cases, right?
Yep.
And when it comes to business owned devices, a lot of those have software to help manage and secure it. But personal owned devices typically do not. So just be aware that if you or your employees or your team members are using personal owned computers, especially in a home environment where they might have kids, you just have to be aware of that and be careful of that. Right, Chad?
It's tricky. Yeah, it gets tricky. And I talk about threat models a lot. And what a threat model is if Ben and I, we have this kind of story that we tell about, if our threat model is very similar, it's because maybe we both travel a lot. And so when we travel, perhaps, Ben and I use a lot of free Wi-Fi in airports, cafes, hotels. And so maybe we even buy Wi-Fi on the plane. So Ben and I, our threat model is very similar. We both use iPhones, relatively recent models. And
Wi-Fi on a plane is terrible. I hate
it. It's hardly worth it. But
I mean, it's amazing that it works at all, but it
yeah. It works better than it once did, but it still depends on how many people are using them. There's a lot of things. It's not unlike the situation we're in now, right? Where everyone's trying to take a shower at the same time, on the internet, so to speak. And so the water pressure is really well in demand.
Mm-hmm.
But it's tricky when we move our threat model from something that's known, where like we work all the time or we travel all the time, into our homes where maybe we don't work or handle client information very often, right? Some of us do. Some of us have been working from home and the office in some balance for years. And so it may not be something that we have to think about in a new way. And for a lot of us, we do, because we have things at home like modems that haven't had a firmware update in 2-3 years. And so it's really easy for someone to intercept transmissions of all kinds, right? So there's those kinds of considerations that just aren't known to Ben and I and the team, right? And so this past couple of weeks has been, from my perspective, really trying to understand what the model is now for a lot of our folks that used to work in offices that we understood very well. And now we don't really know. They may have kids, like Ben said, kids change our threat model dramatically, because, they may have passcodes to things and they may click on something that's maybe not awesome, right? And we may not be there. We may not see it. And, my wife and I both work from home. We have devices that we have committed to work that the kids aren't ever around, can't spill anything on, can't type on, can't, whatever. And we have devices that we use for our personal. And that's not easy to do when we're not being intentional, right? It takes a lot of intention to do that. And none of us have really had time generally to adapt to that on such short notice because of all the pandemic and everything. So yeah, it's on a lot of on the fly stuff that is worth considering now that we're going to be here more long-term.
Yeah, and you just reminded me, when it comes to home devices, modems, routers, Nest cameras, change the default login,
password. Yeah.
password that
Hmm.
comes out of the box. If you haven't done that, or you don't remember if you did that, definitely do that. I mean, that's where people are getting hacked sometimes, because in order to set the device up, you need to have, the default password. And I could Google that and get that, for almost any device. So,
Hmm. Yeah, it's easy.
um, let's see, privileged users. This is something that we run into often. And this privileged users are users who have access to the company information. And now that we're all working from home and we need to get things done, sometimes it's tempting to just say, well, just give everyone access so they can just do their job. The problem with that is giving everyone access to everything increases your risk dramatically, especially now that we're all distributed. So it's more important than ever to evaluate who has access to what, and if you can minimize the number of people that have access to financials, client information, the list goes on, then now is probably a time to make those changes, right? Because we don't want to just, we have to find that balance between making it easy and reducing our security. So a good example is if you have a client folder of all of your clients, if your team all needs access to all of your clients, then that's the way you need to do business. But if your team is working on this client and not that client, then they really should only have access to the clients that they're working on. That's a simplified view, but Chad, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, sure. Some of the smaller organizations have an advantage, right? If you only have, 10 or so people,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's easier to kind of separate access. And so I've gone into a lot of smaller organizations and been impressed with some of the ways that they do restrict access. Where I see a lot of room for improvement, is like legacy stuff, meaning historically, maybe someone had access to something that is no longer with the company, and no one's really done an audit to see, like, if a Google Doc is shared with somebody that maybe it shouldn't be anymore, or a OneDrive link went out to somebody that they don't need access to that anymore. Maybe that's got some company internals, and I don't mean just like P&Ls and things like that. I mean client stuff, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's really important to, and we do these audits as part of our resilience offering, to make sure that those things are audited at least once or twice a year at a minimum, because probably more than 80% of the incidents that we see that are expensive sometimes are traced back to that someone that had
Mm-hmm.
access to something that they shouldn't have had access to, in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just went through an audit of some accounts for a client, and not surprisingly, we found handful of accounts that were freelancers or contractors.
Freelancers and,
And
and contractors are probably the biggest challenge
yeah,
for
so what
organizations.
happens, in my view, and once again, I'm oversimplifying it, and no matter what framework we build, it always gets messy when you put it out there in the real world. But it's easy to bring somebody on because you need them and you need to give them access to something. But when you let them go, especially with a freelancer or a contractor, it's sometimes like, well, they're not working on this project this week, but they might work on this other project in a couple weeks. So we're going to keep the account active. A couple weeks go by, the project may or may not happen. People forget that that account is there. And then it's only months later when we're asked to audit the account that we say, well, what about this person? Like, well, they don't work here anymore. You can get rid of them. So onboarding and offboarding for full-time employees is pretty clear cut. You onboard, you go through a process. You offboard, you go through a process. With freelancers and contractors, we really need this to do the same due diligence for onboarding and offboarding. And I understand if you think you're going to bring them back within a week, that would be silly. But if you think you're going to bring them back in a week and you don't, you need a trigger that says, well, that didn't happen, so now I need to offboard them. There
There's
just
been a
needs to be
handful
a
of,
process.
it is, and the process is an ongoing one. It's not something that is kind of one and done. It's
Mm-hmm.
something continually can be refined. In my field, we call it the rule of least privilege. And what
Mhm.
that means is that we shouldn't really have a need to give anyone access to anything but the bare minimum that's required for them to, get their job done. And
Mhm.
in these kinds of cases, like to Ben's point, is really important. And in a pandemic, we hustle because no one plans for a pandemic, right? I mean, larger
Well,
organizations do,
we
but
will now, but
we
yeah.
will. Well, we will now, right? I mean, it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. But in many ways, it brings to light a lot of these things that you know are these kind of ongoing projects where if we don't put some processes in place even to manage our processes, right, to meet once a year and say, hey, do we have a process for this? Do we have a, or at least a way? It doesn't have to be a formalized policy. It can literally just be like a one pager that says, here's how we're going to do A, B, and C, and when we have to do D, here's how we're going to do that.
Mhm.
But it's intentional, and everyone is kind of riding the same wave, and it is hugely comforting. I
Yeah.
mean, if nothing else, and it also minimizes liability and things with clients. But selfishly, immediately it's about peace of mind, Ben, right? And
Yeah.
we work very hard to
And
help a lot of our clients. It's really in the end about peace of mind.
yeah, and we're all concerned about, conserving resources, saving money, and security now more than ever. So put somebody in charge of your contractors or freelancers, or whoever is in charge of your contractors and freelancers. Say, I need you to make sure that their accounts are periodically audited, because that's where we as a partner can't make that determination. Like, we don't know if you're going to bring that person back or if they're still working for you or not. We just know we were asked to create an account, but until we're told to eliminate the account, it could live there
But
for
if
way
you
too
want some
long.
help with building those processes, those are the kinds of things we do all day long.
Oh yeah.
So we
Yeah,
can
that's a good
offer a
point.
lot of tips, and we have a strong point of view on all of these things, and so we're happy to offer them and on
Yeah.
your behalf, because it's something that you know in some ways it's part of doing business today, and a lot of us that didn't build our businesses yesterday don't there's no way we could know any of these things, that there are considerations that are really important, especially when it comes to minimizing preventable risks and loss,
Yeah.
for sure.
So I'm gonna try the annotation feature, and yellow's not very good. I'm gonna go with red.
Okay.
Um, So remind staff that it's okay to make a mistake and that they should own up if they have
Yeah.
made a mistake.
Yeah, it has to
So,
be a safe place. I mean, if people, feel threatened to report incidents, that's probably the single biggest barrier to resilience in
mhm,
organizations, because people feel ashamed when they make mistakes, or they're afraid to report it. And literally, I mean, we had a client right before the holidays who, um, his wife, went. Our client's spouse was victim of a SIM card attack, um, where someone took control of their mobile phone, their mobile number, um, and when we started interviewing them, and dove into some, building a timeline and a response strategy for them, because it was pretty bad, and we don't have to get into the nuts and bolts of the gloomy side of it, but one of the things that could have helped prevent a lot of that is when they had a breach. They had a compromised Netflix account about 18 months prior. um,
mhm,
we would have liked to have known about that, because we have protocols to follow in those kinds of situations. And there are no silly situations, right? We all fall for stuff all the
mhm,
time, and it's just human. And so we all share the same fate. When one of us does something, that or clicks on something or gives out a piece of information, it doesn't just put ourselves at risk anymore. It affects something larger than
mhm.
ourselves. It could be our family, it could be our coworkers, our team. It certainly could be, even in this case, potentially the bottom line. And so we have to be transparent, as transparent as we're comfortable being about those things, because only then can we, you know, can we help you and help you respond to those instances in a strategic way?
Yeah, that's a good reminder. I think every single time we've sat down with a client after a serious security breach, we have learned about previous breaches. For the first time, we've learned about previous breaches. Because for whatever reason, the culture or awareness was not there to even raise it as a concern. So once again, I've said it before, but now more than ever, because you're all distributed, because you're all working in isolation, we have to over communicate the fact that if you see something, say something, bring it to our attention, even if it sounds small. We should confirm that it's not something bigger.
We'd rather have a false positive or, something that isn't an issue. We love it when the solution is simple, right, Ben?
Yeah.
And so we don't mind those are not interruptions to us, where we welcome those kinds of communications, because, the alternative can be really bad. So it's important to let us know about those things, even when they seem, insignificant.
Yeah, and I just want to wrap up here with, because I know we're running out of time. And if I've missed any questions, I apologize. We'll get to them, or please send us any questions you have right now through chat. Acceptable use policy. We're trying to get all of our clients to have an acceptable use policy and to share that with their team. And now is a good time to evaluate that and communicate that. But we also have to realize that because of the situation we're all working in, have exceptions, right? And this is where I think a lot of our clients they stumble or get frustrated, because it's really hard to build. We're essentially building a framework, right? These are the rules, the guidelines, the framework by which we're going to use to govern how we operate. But as I mentioned earlier, the real world is messy, and sometimes there are exceptions, and sometimes things just don't go as planned or work as planned. But without that framework, we're just constantly in a state of unknown. So we need that framework to guide us. And if you don't have a framework in place for work from home, I know some of our clients have a work from home policy, but a lot of them don't. Now's the time to have one and to communicate that and to make it better, and iterate on that.
And it's important for more than, just that one reason. It's important too, when we're working with client information and client assets. It could be images. It doesn't really have anything to do with it being sensitive information or not. How our clients and your clients classify information matters. And we're not always aware of that, right? Like if we work for a Fortune 500 company, they have very clear and explicit classifications for the kinds of information that they share. And so there's certain consequences that come along with those different classifications, depending on what happens to it. And some of it's classified as intellectual property. Some of it's like brand strategy stuff. Some of it's, not what we would think. We would think, oh, we're just generating some images or some broadcast spots or whatever it is. But the rules have changed a lot. And so a lot of it is really just fluency and helping everyone, broaden their understanding.
Mm-hmm. So let's see, remote working checklist continues here. And this is interesting. I had not thought about this, but I know we've talked about it, Chad, is remind staff not to have confidential calls and not to discuss business near smart speakers.
Yeah.
Like Amazon's Alexa, even Apple's HomePod or Google's Home. I don't know that anyone's actually doing that right now.
They're probably not thinking about it yet, but it's going to come up. We haven't, seen but a handful of these in the mainstream where they've been brought to light and kind of demonized in the media. But there's going to be more because more of us are working from home. And this is, again, to Ben's point about shadow IT, when we intermingle work managed technology with home unmanaged technology, things get really out of control really fast. And it's things that we wouldn't even think about. And this is why like threat models and things are really important to us in our work, to help us understand how you're using technology, not just the technology you're using, but how you use it, helps us develop strategies for you that make sense to protect you and your business, because it's really about kind of protecting our butts and making sure we're, using
Yeah,
good
and
practice.
you mentioned shadow IT, and I don't know that we specifically defined that during this call. So for
We
those of you
haven't.
who don't know shadow IT is basically, there are a lot of IT functions that we provide and we work with our clients on. But when people don't get what they need to do their job and they don't understand why they're not getting what they need, then they often resort to what's called shadow IT, which is them working in the shadows so that nobody knows what they're doing, to get things done, either
Or
to
what
clear
tools they're
files.
using. They may be
Yeah,
using unsanctioned tools,
right.
unsanctioned, unknown devices. If their kids are using their laptop to do homework, then
Hmm.
suddenly they're using a personal device to do their work, for example.
Hmm.
And there's lots of examples of it. It's not unusual. It's not
Right,
evil. It just is
right,
something that humans, we generally tend to kind of default to that kind of behavior without any clear guidelines.
right. And the point of sharing this is you want to communicate to your team that if they are struggling to get their job done and they need help, to please, reach out to you, and then you in turn, as our primary contact, can reach out to us, and we can help solve that problem. Because if 9 times out of 10, it's a communication issue. Once we explain
Totally.
why they can or cannot do something, it makes total sense. But if we can't make sense of it, and they can't make sense of it, then they're just going to resort to doing whatever they need to get their job done. And so we need to have that communication. And too often, the communication never
It's
happens.
tricky. Yeah. And that's what the point of like an acceptable use policy. It basically says, hey, everybody, these are the things that are cool that we can do. We agree these are good ideas and good tools and good practices for us. And here, then on this list over here, these are the things we don't agree to. These are the things that are
Mhm.
definitely not, you know, good for our team and our liability, right? Our threat model and all the things that can harm us. And there's a lot of things out there that are making, this creating these frameworks, much more friendly, right? Choosing a platform like Box or Dropbox or whatever it is, and kind of making that your primary. Shadow IT cultures tend to have 7 or 8 or more platforms all over the place without any clear rules about, and back to our point about freelancers and, cleaning up access after the fact. The more that those platforms become, more kind of, segregated from a primary framework, the harder it is to keep track of everybody and what everybody's doing
Mhm.
and what they're sharing. And so it's really just trying to simplify things, and it all ties back to peace of mind.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's wrap it up here. I just want to remind
Thanks.
everyone that we are a resource for you, and we have lots of experience working this way. But we also kind of don't even realize what we know. Meaning, we've done this for so long. It's almost difficult for us to go back in time and say, well, what was it like when we first started doing
Oh,
this?
I
To be
remember.
fair, what's that?
I totally remember. I
Well, I was going
do.
to say I'm starting to remember because I'm helping my family with issues that
Cool.
are like,
Cool.
what, really? Why is this a problem?
Yeah.
But we need to know about those problems so we can help all of you. And so please use our resources online, support.forgetcomputers.com. Please email us either at support@forgetcomputers.com, or use support menu, or use our online, open a ticket support request. And really, once again, communication. We need to know how we can help you, and you, as our primary contacts at our organizations, need to reach out to your team and assure them that the communication channels are open. Use us as a resource, give feedback to you, um, and we're all in
And
this
thanks for your
together.
time.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
we're
we
going to
are
help
all in
each
this
other
together,
through it.
like it or
Okay,
not.
well, thank you very much for everyone who joined us. Thanks, Chad.
Yeah.
And
Thanks,
we
Ben.
will see you next week. We're going to do a series of these. and we can go a deeper dive into some of these topics, whether it's, maybe a focus on Ring Central, or a focus on Teams, or a focus on any of the challenges that we're all experiencing.
Big or small.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Yeah. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah.
You too.